Do we have an audio check? Good. Video check? Good. Lights? Good. Okay, we're ready on 3. 1, 2, 3. We're live. Hey, good morning. It's Palm Sunday. My name is Pastor Jason Abbott. Thank you for joining us online for this video teaching. We're with Glade Baptist Church. If you're a member of Glade Baptist Church, somebody visits with us, we're glad you could tune in with us. Since we're doing this Bible teaching, since we can't meet together right now, if you're somebody who just catches up with us online and watches our videos and keeps up with our content, we're glad you're tuning in as well. And if you're somebody who sends us messages and questions, we're glad you're interacting with us, and so welcome. We're here on Palm Sunday, and so our teaching will kind of focus on that a bit. And this morning when I was thinking about the sermon message, I was thinking about a movie actually. You might recognize it, called Elf. And it's a very popular movie. A lot of kids, a lot of families like to watch it at Christmas time. And it's got this funny little story. It kind of is built around the idea that there's this elf from the North Pole who wants to meet his father, who is in New York City. Well, the guy's never been outside the North Pole, and he's not actually an elf. He was adopted by the elves. He's an adult male. And so he leaves the North Pole for the first time to go to New York City. And so a lot of the comedy from that is kind of built on that experience, that he's in this very strange, big city, experience that he's having. It's just so very different. The customs and what's going on and how he has to adapt, That's where a lot of the comedy is. And it's got a lot of memorable quotes in the movie that people like.
Uh-oh. Looks like someone needs to sing a Christmas carol.
No way.
Best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear.
Thanks.
That's right. The best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loudly for all to hear. So you might remember that. Anyways, if you've seen the movie, it's cute. It's silly. But anyways, so this elf thing kind of came to mind because, he's in this very strange experience that he goes through. Just kind of out of place. And I was thinking, a new Christian, or somebody, maybe you've been a Christian for a while, but you haven't really, really dug into the Bible and got into it in a big way. And so, when you do that, it can really seem like you're out of place. It can really seem like, wow, this is a whole world that's opening up to me that is so very different from what I know. This epic story, is kind of compiled in these 66 books. They're all, put together, and it's written by over a dozen authors, and it covers thousands of years, and these different dynasties of kings, and these different cultures, and, it's everything from Ethiopia to Persia to Macedonia. All this just comes together in this big epic story. And you look into it and you go, wow, that is so very different from what I know and what I experienced. It's so unique. It's just like being in a different world. And I get that. If you're a 21st century American getting into the Bible and learning about its story and what God has revealed to us, yeah, it's kind of like that. But if you're a Jewish person who's come to faith in Christ and you're getting into the Bible and really understanding what's going on, you do have a connecting point. There's the tradition you have, there's the heritage behind your Jewish faith, there's the customs and the holidays and the festivals. You already have that kind of built in. You already have a connecting point. But for the non-Jews, what we'd say is Gentiles, well, it can be kind of hard to find your place in this story. And so that's what our focus is today, is finding your place in the story. Because you might at some point opened up this big book with all that's going on and all that it's telling you, and you just might think, well, where do I find my place in this story? And that's what our focus is today. So, finding your place in the story. And what we want to do is we want to go to the New Testament today, and we're going to be in the Gospel of Mark. So if you have a Bible, a hard copy like what I have open here, or maybe something available like an app. There's a couple really good free ones that I recommend to people. One of them is called the YouVersion app, and the other one is through the Gideon's organization, and it's also a free app. And these Bible apps will give you the Bible. You can carry it with you, access it anytime you want to read through it. And they offer daily devotionals to kind of maybe focus your reading a little bit and give you that kind of structure. So they're good things. So anyways, I'd recommend those if you don't have them. You can put it on your phone, put it on your tablet, whatever. But I'm using the hard copy today, and I already turned to the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark. Now, that's in the New Testament, and Mark is writing to us, and most scholars believe that he's writing from the experiences and listening to Peter, the Apostle Peter. And so he's hearing that, and he's writing it down for us, and he's giving us all these details about the life of Jesus. And Mark is a very condensed gospel. Mark is the shortest of the 4 gospels. And like I said, it comes from Peter to Mark, and a lot of scholars believe it's the earliest gospel written. So once you get to the Gospel of Mark, we're going to be in chapter 11. So go to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11. And what we're going to pick up is starting with at the beginning of chapter 11, just to give some context for what's going on. This is usually titled a triumphal entry, and it's Jesus coming into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And so at the beginning of this week, on Palm Sunday, this is the week in which he is arrested and crucified. And so he comes into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And there's very much a kind of parade-like atmosphere. It's celebratory. His disciples are there and others are there, and they're kind of cheering him on because a lot of them recognize the signal he's given them. And the signal is this: that there's an Old Testament prophecy with the coming of the king into Jerusalem and him riding on a donkey. And so they're recognizing this signal from Jesus. The Romans probably saw him coming on a donkey and all this and just probably thought this is nothing. He's on a donkey. But for those that knew and those that were paying attention, they recognized it as a fulfillment of prophecy. And they recognize it as hearkening back to King Solomon's coronation when he came into Jerusalem on a donkey. And so it has that message to it when he enters Jerusalem in this parade-like atmosphere. Now, the other part of the context is that this is Passover week, which is the biggest holiday, the biggest part on the Jewish calendar. And you will have the city of Jerusalem just swollen with people. There's hundreds of thousands more people in Jerusalem than normally, because Jews have come over from different parts of the empire and the Holy Land as well to Jerusalem to celebrate this Passover holiday. And you also have non-Jews who have come to faith in the God of Israel. They would have been coming too. And you would also have Gentiles, non-Jews, who had a sincere interest and curiosity about all this coming to see. Well, this is the atmosphere and this is the context from which Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey with the crowds waving palm branches, celebrating it. Well, we really don't have anything in our experience that's quite like Passover. It's such a big holiday, and it kind of, just to give you an idea, it's kind of like the 4th of July and Christmas being put together. If you can imagine those holidays coming together in one huge, big celebration, that's kind of what it's like. Because, with the 4th of July, we celebrate our identity as Americans. It's patriotic, our history behind it. So there's that element. And then with Passover, like with Christmas, there's the spiritual message to it. And there's the religious connotation. And so you have this, two very big holidays coming together in what the Jewish people were experiencing and celebrating. So that's the context for Jesus coming into Jerusalem at this time. Well, he comes into Jerusalem, and where we're going to pick up is an event that happens not too much longer after that. Okay, so Jesus comes into Jerusalem, and then we see him a little later on going to the temple complex. Now, the temple itself, where the Jewish worship was focused, was huge. I mean, we really don't have much of anything like that to compare it to. It was like 30 acres as far as its size, and this is where Jesus is going, and this is where we'll pick up in Mark chapter 11, verses 15 through 17. It says, "Then they came into Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple complex, and he began to throw out those buying and selling in the temple. He overturned the money changers' tables and the chairs of those selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple complex." So Jesus comes in with this big parade-like atmosphere and all this cheering and all this kind of hoopla. And he ends up making his way to the temple complex. And then something very strange happens. Probably something his disciples or nobody else there could have ever predicted. As it says that he went into the temple complex and began to throw out those buying and selling in the temple. Well, this is a place of worship. What are they buying and selling? Well, part of their sacrificial system, part of their religious tradition, part of what they did, was to bring their sacrifices, these animals, to present at the temple. Well, they had to be inspected before they would be accepted for this process. And the temple authorities had a habit of rejecting what people brought. They would see their animal that they brought to offer as a sacrifice for the tradition, and they would be turned away because their sacrifice was deemed unacceptable. It was flawed. It was blemished. It was not acceptable. And so they'd be turned away. And so you have people bringing these animals, and who knows how far they brought them, maybe miles, maybe hundreds of miles. And so they're bringing them in here with this, and they've cared for them, and then they brought them in, and now they're there. And then at the last moment, they get turned away. Well, what are you going to do? You don't just carry, livestock around with you. But the temple authorities had a solution for you. They would have one that you could buy from them that would be acceptable. And so that was their racket. People would take their hard-earned money and their property, and they'd bring it in there to offer it as a sacrifice, and they'd be turned away. And then they would be upcharged for one of the animals that the priests and all could offer them. So they wouldn't have to go away, empty-handed and not be able to celebrate the Passover properly. Well, scholars have looked at this, and they have come up with a range. They said, the upcharge on these animals that they were selling at the temple to the people so that they could offer the sacrifice was somewhere maybe between 50 and 70%. And so that's a pretty big upcharge. And so you have people going through all the trouble, bringing the right sacrifice, bringing the right animal to the temple, and all waiting and going and traveling and all that entails, getting there at the last second, then being turned away, having no other option, and then the temple authorities bringing in this racket of, well, you can buy one of ours, it's acceptable, and then being upcharged this huge amount. Well, you can see why this would upset Jesus, because this is a place of worship. This is the temple complex. Why is this going on like this? Well, next part. It says, "And then he overturned the money changers' tables." So Jesus is overturning tables of money changers. Well, why are they changing money in the temple? What is that about? Well, another thing that you had to do, a part of this routine, was to pay the temple tax. And the racket with that they had come up with was that they only accepted certain coins, certain denominations certain coinage for that temple tax. Now, Rome had a very structured economic system. Coins could be brought in and used from all over the empire. But the temple authorities had set it up as, well, we only want this denomination, we only want this kind of coin as your donation, as your temple tax. Well, you come there with your denomination of coin from Egypt or Ethiopia or, Philippi or Athens or wherever, and it's no longer deemed acceptable. Well, we can't take that. Well, what are you going to do? Well, they had a solution for that too. They said, well, you give us your coins and we'll change it over into the acceptable kind of coin. And then we'll trade it that way. Well, as you can imagine, the racket was that they were going to cheat the person and not give them a fair trade for coin. And so they were making money off of that, the temple tax. So Jesus sees this going on, and he flips the tables. He overturns the tables of all this kind of thing. And then it says he would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple complex. And so not only is he doing these other things, he's also no longer allowing them to go through the temple complex, these outer courts. Because what people had a habit of doing was they thought so little of these outer courts. They thought, well, it's not exactly, the inner courts, so it's not special, it's not as holy, it's not as, important. And so they would, literally groups of people and carrying their goods would travel through those as a shortcut to get to another part of Jerusalem, another part of the temple or something like that. And so you had people going this way, and then you had another group going that way, and they didn't care about any of this other stuff. But this is still the temple complex. So you can imagine how chaotic and awful this looked. This was supposed to be a place where people came to worship, to meditate, to pray. And it looks like a flea market. I mean, it's smelly because you got all these animals. You got the ones that people were bringing, and you got the ones that the temple authorities are trying to, sell off. So it's loud, it's smelly, it's like a flea market kind of atmosphere. You have people bartering and arguing, with the money changers and all that's going on. And so this is so chaotic, and it's awful. This is supposed to be, the holiest place on earth. This is supposed to be the place where heaven and earth intersect. This is the place to worship the one true God. And what's going on? Well, it's a mess. It's a complete and utter mess. And Jesus reacts to this. And then it says in verse 17, and he began to teach them, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves. Listen to that. Is it not written? So he's saying, isn't it true? Don't you know that this is how it's supposed to be? See, he's not coming up with this off the top of his head, just his idea. He's quoting an Old Testament prophet that they would have known, that they would have read, that they would have been familiar with. They know what's right. And he said, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? He's quoting the prophet Isaiah, and he's saying, my house, this temple complex, is a house of prayer for all nations. But they made it into this kind of crazy, smelly, loud, flea market kind of thing going on. He says, this is what it's supposed to be. How are you going to pray? How are you going to seek God? How are you going to meditate on His Word in the midst of all that craziness? Why did you ever think this was permissible? Why did you ever think, is it not written? He's saying. And he follows it up and he says, but you have made it a den of thieves. Now that's also a quotation from a prophet in the Old Testament. And it's from the prophet Jeremiah. And he's saying, look, it's supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations. But instead, you've made it a den of thieves. You've made it a den of thieves. Now, den of thieves, it doesn't mean that this is the place where their criminal activity happens. It's a little more condemning than that. He's saying a den of thieves. That's saying that the den of thieves is the place where the thieves go after they've committed their crime, and it's their getaway place to feel safe. See, you've made all this into a den of thieves. The thieves feel comfortable here. They feel safe here. They shouldn't feel safe in the house of God, being criminals, abusing people. They shouldn't feel safe that way. They shouldn't feel safe in that environment. They should recognize there's a holy God. But he's saying, this is what's happened. Now, the first part, when he says it's a house of prayer for all nations, notice it's not just a house of prayer for Jews. It's not just a house of prayer for those, related to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's not just a house of prayer for them. It's a house of prayer for all nations. This outer court, while all this craziness was going on, where all this abuse was going on, this thievery and all that, the place where that was going on was the court of the Gentiles. And it was this very open area. King Herod had surrounded it by a colonnade, and it was covered in marble. But it was this very large open area. And that's what they've turned into, this kind of awful flea market kind of thing in the temple complex. And this court of Gentiles was specific for those outside the Jewish faith, those who didn't have that heritage, that family connection there, that they could come and they could seek God. They could come and learn about God. They could come and worship. Well, the Romans called it the Atrium Gentium, which is where we get the word Gentiles. And you might have heard it referred to as the place of the ethnos, because ethnos means people, which is the Greek word for them, where we also get ethnicity. The Hebrew word would be goyim. So you might have heard this referred to in different ways, but it's the court of the Gentiles. And it's the place for them to come and seek God. And that's the area that Jesus is causing all this to go on. He's trying to reestablish, trying to get everybody's attention. He's trying to stop all this and reestablish what should be going on. Not a den of thieves. Not all this loud, smelly, chaotic stuff, but a house of prayer for all nations. Because, see, he's not just getting rid of the riffraff. See, one of the things that Jesus was doing was he was coming to be everything that Israel should have been. His vocation was to be everything Israel should have been. And Israel was called, and this comes from the prophet Isaiah too, Israel is called to be a light unto the Gentiles. A light unto the Gentiles. That Israel's purpose and their presence in the world should be like a lighthouse where Gentiles, those in the countries around and nearby, can see and come and learn that there is a God. There is one true God. And he has made a covenant agreement with people. And he has come and he loves people. They're his creation. And so Jesus is coming to be all that Israel was called to be. He is the light unto the Gentiles. And so when he's doing this, he's reestablishing what should have been happening all along. So the Gentiles, non-Jews like you and probably I, and that we could find our place in the story. That we could find our place in the story. That's what he's doing. Because, as Paul wrote in the letter to the Ephesians in chapter 2, he calls us citizens. We're not foreigners. We're Gentiles, non-Jews. We're not foreigners. We're not strangers. We're not at the end of the line. We're not plan B. We're not an afterthought. No. We're called citizens through faith in Christ. When Paul is writing to the church at Galatia in chapter 4, he calls us heirs, like sons. Heirs. We're called the seed of Abraham. We're called through faith that we are heirs. And so what I want you to remember this morning, and what we've been talking about, when you think about your place in the story, what I want you to remember is that we're family. These are our people. These people of faith. So you can think about someone like Mary, the mother of Jesus, maybe standing next to you, putting her hand on your shoulder and saying, "You're one of us." Or you could think of maybe the Apostle Paul standing next to you and putting his hand on your shoulder and saying, "You're one of us." We're family. We are family. That's our place in the story. We're part of the family of faith. No less than any. We are family. So what I want to encourage you to do is to embrace that. To know that. To let that encourage you. Jesus went through a lot of trouble. A cross. To make that certain, to establish that, to call us to faith, because we're family when we do. We have a place at the table. Not plan B, not an afterthought. We're family. Let that encourage you this week.